all my mints. So it was cool. I had lemon balm, I had all this stuff, but it wasn't cool because it was December. So that was not quite right. So if those things are going to come back, I would just always think like, what's the mold doing? What other
My
poor
mints was cool. I
plant
had lemon balm.
thinks
I had
that
all
it
this stuff.
wants to
But
be flowering right now and it starts and then it snows and everything gets off. So I feel like we end up with these little spurts. Oh, we're talking about allergies, and I was just kind of talking about like where we are in springtime allergies because I think that we get these bursts of pollens coming because it's kind of confusing how the weather goes, and you'll have a week of like 70 degrees, and then it's cold again, and then it's raining for a week, and then it's sunny, and then it snows. That's where I live. So I think that we do get exposed over a few months now instead of just, it turns to be March and April and you get your spring allergies. So it's a little bit unclear. And some people know that they have pollen allergies. But I'll tell you this, Hillary, one thing I do know is that I more and more hear from people that they say, you know, I didn't have allergies when I was little, or I only was allergic to this. And now I'm feeling these allergies in spring, in fall, sometimes even for a 2 week bout in the summer. And so I feel like it really is that people's guts are a little sicker and that we're not quite as robust. And you do get more and more histamine response. So there's this thing like histamine intolerance, right? You hear that too, right?
Can we talk a little bit about histamine? Because yesterday was a really interesting thing. I saw a patient where, hold on, this light's triggering me. The poor baby had a lot of life stress happening. This is usually in the background. Often we do the worst when we've got, like, if we get stacked with life stresses.
Wait, this is an adult female patient, not our actual baby. Okay, go.
Adult, did I
I'm
say?
translating for you. You said poor baby, and sometimes people
Oh,
listening
it's
think
not a
it
baby,
was
an adult female.
Yeah.
And she got a bee sting, a pretty wicked bee sting. She didn't have sensitivity to a bee sting before, but she got a lot of symptoms from it. She got a lot of, we talked about this. If you guys didn't see that our day one, where we started talking about allergies, we started to talk about histamine. So she was explaining her symptoms, that she had been feeling anxious, depressed, because anxious and stressed really was hers, because histamine can impact the brain. She was having some runny nose, some red, itchy, swelling, feeling throat, because histamine can do that. Think peanut allergy, where the kids get anaphylactic. That's caused by histamines, extremes of histamines. But we just want you to know that the symptomatology, so you understand if it's happening to you, and then you can treat some of the things. She was getting muscle pain, bone pain, very common with histamine. If you wake up in the morning and you're just like, dude, I feel like I ran a marathon and I don't know why. I'm just sore or I'm tired for no reason. It's your histamines.
Yeah.
And then she was getting a lot of urinary frequency. So to the point where somebody said to her, you must have a bladder infection. It can't be related to the histamine. And the urgent care doctor, it can't be related to the histamine. Yet, of course, the urine she did not have a UTI, because we all know it was the histamine irritating her bladder. Bladder frequency is a very common, urinary frequency is a very common symptom. So we just want you to like understand these symptoms, because not everybody gets the classic runny eye, runny nose, triad, fatigue triad. It could be that you get more GI issues and bladder spasticity that can happen. And we're going to look and say, this is histamine. So this part of our allergy education here is understanding the role of histamine. How, and like Kara was describing, we've got this long season now where we're exposed, which is really changing with the environment. And depending on where you are, you're mostly going straight from viral bacterial season into allergy season. So it's like, if you get COVID or a flu or RSV, and then all of a sudden you're exposed to a bunch of dust or your allergens, that can really knock you down, because our bodies, things become additive in our bodies. And it, especially with histamine, it's like, if you get pushed over the edge and these mast cells are releasing a lot, you're going to have a lot of symptoms. So we just want you to understand what they are and to learn how to kind of work with them at home.
Yeah, and I love that the bladder symptom is a
She
big one.
loved it when I just said, honey, it wasn't a UTI, it was your histamine. She's like, I thought they were
Oh,
connected and
okay.
nobody connected the dots. Like, how did the urgent care doctor not know? And I'm like, well, they don't do deep dives on this. They just don't know, so it's good for us to know this info.
Yeah, histamine is really aggravating to the body. And we do have this thing now that we refer to as histamine intolerance, where, histamine's in our foods. That's our topic today. But sometimes, you're going along your life, you've never had any kind of allergy response or any of these symptoms we're talking about. And then all of a sudden you do, and people get confused because they look like other symptoms, right? But I think there's a lot of people that are having histamine intolerance from specific foods that they're eating, and they just aren't connecting it. And so I want to talk about that today because we have three areas, right, Hillary, that we see repeated issues for people with certain foods that are good for you foods, but can cause people some problems with the histamine. And this really goes in the bigger picture of dealing with human beings in this year, between all the issues we have as far as our lifestyle, our lack of connection with people, our food supply, the problems with our GI systems. Between all of that, we have a lot of people who are reacting to histamines and just don't know it. And so we have to identify it in which foods they can avoid to decrease this amount, right? And so what's the most surprising one you think to you? It's probably bone broth, right?
Bone broth, like it gets annoying and
Yeah.
people get kind of indignant, especially those of us that have been in the health space for a while, or patients who have been researching what's really healthy for me, what's
Mhm.
really good for me, and they're
Mhm.
making things at home, and they hear one of our talks on bone broth, they hear one of our talks on fermented foods and why you need it for the gut microbiome. And so it feels really confusing when you're like, wait, what? The foods that are the highest in histamines are bone broth and fermented foods. How could
Mhm.
that be? Those are health foods. I do them
Right.
all the time. I'm doing it for my gut health. And we go, well, they're really high in histamine, so try to drop them off when you're having these histamine flares. And it
Right.
feels really agitating and irritating when you're a human on the planet just trying to do good things. So, like, we
And
just
you,
want to
yeah.
say we recognize the annoyance of some of the
Mhm.
messaging.
Well, because it
What's
is direct
healthy,
opposite.
what is not healthy, and how the hell are we supposed to figure it out?
Because
So
it has to be in that moment in time, like what's good for you, right? So that's a big piece of the puzzle for people, is that if you look up allergies and sort of look at the research, you'll see that people who take probiotics, which we really recommend taking a pill form of a probiotic. We really like that best. But people who take probiotics in their foods, which can be in fermented foods like kimchi or sauerkraut or any of that, or you can have, or kombucha that has probiotics, or dairy products like yogurts, etc., that people like to have. There's also fermented soy foods. Those foods have probiotics too, and we read research that helps people with allergy symptoms. That's great, but that's not actually the end of the story, because those foods can actually really aggravate people who have a histamine intolerance, because there's a big histamine load that then is hitting their GI tract and causing a big reaction. So it's kind of a yes, we want you to get probiotics, but maybe not from fermented foods while you're experiencing allergy symptoms.
the fermented, there's a lot of things that are fermented, like Kara said. The
And
fermented dairy products, sauerkraut, kimchi's, the kombuchas, wine, beer, like
red
alcohol,
wine, such a
fermented
big
product,
one. Mhm. And
vinegars
vinegars.
are fermented. So these things all trigger histamine or potentiate histamine responses. And that can be just really annoying. But in general, when you cut down the histamine load from your diet and you're experiencing a lot of allergy at the time, or headaches from allergy, or any of the symptom areas we discussed, the foods make a huge difference.
Huge.
And
So
Kara and
as
I were talking about earlier, we get sad when people are on long-term low histamine diets because it can be extremely restrictive long term. And we like, before our patients set off on these really kind of extreme diets for long periods of time, we want to make sure that that's necessary and that's right for them. So we're not advocating these for long term, though. If you chronically have lived in mold or you chronically have other things, you might need to do these things for a longer time. But generally, it's during the time when you're experiencing symptoms, and when you heal and you move on and your body's like through the allergy season or through after the mold exposure or through the thing, then you likely will be able to tolerate these things again until the symptoms come back and you pull out. Because it's hard to like not have any fermented food, and which, so.
And so these are the three categories that we were talking about. It's fermented foods, bone broth, which is potentially a really good thing for people, but maybe not during their allergy seasons. And then any leftovers. This one just kills me because you see this a lot for people. We're trying to have people cook at home. We don't want you eating out all the time. We know that the oils when you eat out are more pro-inflammatory, and that you can control your ingredients at home. We know that, you're just not going to get the highest level of quality at a restaurant these days. It's very unlikely. So it's hard to say, okay, cook all your meals at home and then not eat leftovers. So you absolutely can eat leftovers, but you just freeze them in individual portions, because as the food sits there, and especially if it's an animal food, so picture a piece of chicken, many people will like batch cook the chicken on the weekend and they'll eat it the first 3 or 4 days of the week or something like that. That's actually not a really good idea if we're trying to lower histamine intake. And so just get individual containers and freeze those meals. It can be soup, it can be whatever, just freeze it individually, and then you just eat it then. And I think that can be a huge difference for people. It's especially the meats are bad for increasing with histamine day after day when it's sitting in your refrigerator.
It's annoying.
It is annoying.
If you're watching live with us here now, who eats regular fermented food is a regular part of your diet, whether you have allergies or not. So that's kombucha, sauerkraut, any kind of fermented dairy, yogurt, kefir, wine, beer. It's one of those commonly and vinegars, right?
Yeah.
So that means any kind of any kind of salad dressing. So, I mean, I know that I have some patients that Kara and I've worked with that we haven't even really gotten to have these conversations, and mold has been part of your issue, or severe allergies because of dust loads or because of where your house is located environmentally. A lot of people who get exposed to high winds, or if you're in an area, you're going to have more things in your home. I think tomorrow is the day that we talk about how to protect your home. But it's a really good thing if you're having extra allergies to look at it, and these things are readily available. There's good lists. Like if you type in an antihistamine diet, the top offenders will come up, but it's really what Kara just went through: the fermented foods, bone broths, and leftovers.
Yeah,
And
it'll be like meats and aged cheeses and anything that's aged, right? Especially from an animal. So that's
yeah, and so that's just one of those things to kind of take an assessment of and recognize that although many of those things are considered health foods, there are not health foods for you if you are in a histamine flare.
yeah. All right, take that home, everybody. Let us know how it goes for you and whether you see any symptoms get better if you stop eating leftovers that aren't frozen and individually wrapped, or getting rid of fermented foods or bone broth. Bye, Hill.
Bye, guys. See you tomorrow. Mwah.